Pennsylvania's hunting community was hit hard again with the revelation that a free-ranging white-tailed deer tested positive for chronic wasting disease. The Pennsylvania Game Commission recently held a news conference to detail their response, and State Representative Keith Gillespie, the majority chairman of the House Game and Fisheries Committee, was there for their report. First of all, Representative, can you give us the abbreviated version of what CWD is, if that's possible, and why it is so troublesome?
Well, Scott, certainly give it my best shot, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with you and your listeners. CWD started in Colorado back in 1960 and has since then spread across the United States and into Canada, infecting 26 states and 3 of the provinces up in our northern border. It's a neurological disease. It's not a virus. It's not a bacteria. It's a protein, and it actually the disease-carrying characteristics gets embedded in the soil, excreted by deer either through feces, saliva, or urine, gets uptake by vegetation that is then consumed by deer and other animals, and has just been spreading, not quite like wildfire, but has been spreading exponentially since it started back in 1960.
Two things people are going to think about when they hear that. A, there is no cure, and B, what is the possibility of human interaction, so to speak?
At this point, there hasn't been any crossover. As we saw years ago, people may recall the mad cow disease, and in England where 220-some people actually became affected with the mad cow disease from eating contaminated beef and died. At this point, if an animal has been harvested by a hunter and is suspected to be infected with CWD, that animal can be tested, and if it obviously is infected with CWD, they're going to recommend that it not be consumed. If a hunter was to harvest an animal that does not look healthy, and the Game Commission has in fact authorize those people to do that, they will give them a replacement tag once they turn that animal in. That just is going to help with the reduction in the spread of the disease. But certainly those individual animals would not want to be consumed.
So it's not believed to be a threat to humans. However, it is definitely a threat to the human population from an economic perspective, is it not?
Absolutely. This latest deer that you identified, a wild deer that was shot on a state game lands, was harvested within 10 miles of Pennsylvania's elk range. Pennsylvania's elk range, talk about a success story that this species has been reintroduced. They have a visitor center out there. They get hundreds of thousands of people in from all over the world to tour this majestic animal that we have here in the Commonwealth. This disease is transmittable from deer to elk. No problem whatsoever through either the feces, saliva, the interaction. Deer and elk will intertwine. They're very social, and it would be easy for this disease to be spread. The economic impact is estimated to be $70 million a year just from the Keystone Country Elk Alliance. People coming in and viewing and buying things and sleeping in the hotels and eating in the restaurants and the gas stations, etc. And it would just be absolutely crippling and devastating to that part of the Commonwealth.
This disease is not indigenous to Pennsylvania. You mentioned that with Colorado. Some other states have and are dealing with it as well. And what are they doing?
Well, probably the most hallmark example of a state trying to do something was Illinois, where they actually did a targeted shooting of what they felt was a concentrated population of potentially infected animals. And they brought sharpshooters in, and they essentially wiped out a targeted, with a surgical removal of these sharpshooters, a specific area to stop the spread of the disease. That's certainly something that would have to be considered here in Pennsylvania because there's no other way to stop it. You can't, as I said earlier, you can't vaccinate against it. You can't spray something. You can't inoculate free-ranging animals because of it being a protein. The only way that you can kill this is at a high temperature for an extended period of time. We don't want to turn Pennsylvania into a cinder. So They've stopped the use of urine attractants for hunting in the suspected areas, which could be, because of it being urine, could be a source of transmission. They're no longer allowed to transport the skull, the brain, the backbone, with having the spinal column out of the area to halt the progression of the disease out of the area. The only thing that is left to do is to try to do some surgical removal of where they feel the concentration would be.
Now let's talk about that. We should mention, the Game Commission did talk about sharpshooters, but that's down the road. Immediately, the one thing they mentioned is DMAP permits. Can you explain what they are?
DMAPs is a program that the Pennsylvania Game Commission has that any licensed hunter can apply for. And they would be getting permits above and beyond their regular antlerless or hunting permits that they would get. Again, the idea is to try to, through that process, through a regular hunting season and an extended hunting season in the cases of some of these special regulation areas, reducing the deer horde. And then, as you said, at the last resort, after the regular hunting season is over, they would do an evaluation of the concentration of deer left, and if necessary, bring in potentially sharpshooters to stop the spread of the disease.
After the season.
After the season. Yeah.
Finally, PGC mentioned a number of times during the news conference about how the public can play a role in this. Now, maybe not so much in your district, but not far away, Adams County is another disease management area. Obviously, hunters like to travel. It's conceivable somebody could be going up to Clearfield or Route counties. What's the role that the public can play in this? Vigilance,
being particularly hypervigilant, and hunters typically, as a rule, are they're constantly scanning, looking, evaluating, and should they see an animal that has lost its fear of human-animal contact. I mean, deer are they have a flight response. They see something they don't like, they lift their tail up and they go the other way. For an animal that's not exhibiting those kind of characteristics or looks emaciated in the more advanced stages of the chronic wasting disease, as the name would imply, they are chronically wasting away and are literally skin and bones.
In other words, it's very obvious what this is.
It is. And when we're asking people to be vigilant, to report that, to call the 800 numbers for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, if you can give them a GPS coordinate, great. But a location of where this deer was sighted, and so that they can go out and evaluate the situation.
We should mention Chairman Gillespie's website does have information on chronic wasting disease on it, so if you would like more information, obviously you can visit there and get some details. If you do have questions about this or any other legislative issue, we'll show you also how to get in contact with Chairman Gillespie in just a few seconds. I'm Scott Little. This has been Legislative Report.